Joining us today to discuss legal issues faced by the LGBTQ plus community, we have CP Hoffman. CP is a non-binary attorney whose work has included antitrust law, advocacy, and policy reform. They have dedicated their legal career to expanding the rights of queer individuals and inclusivity. They have a JD from the University of Illinois College of Law and an LLM in comparative law from the McGill University Institute of Comparative Law. From 2018 through 2020, they served as an advisory committee member and a Mid-Atlantic region leader for the Intersex and Genderqueer Recognition Project, which is now known as the Non-Binary and Intersex Recognition Project. They are currently the legal director of FreeState Justice, an organization that serves Maryland's LGBTQ plus community. So first of all, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So can we just start off by with you telling us about the organization FreeState Justice and about your role within that organization?
Yes. So FreeState Justice is Maryland's LGBTQ advocacy organization. We were formed a few years ago out of a merger of two prior organizations, Equality Maryland and the Free State Legal Project. Equality Maryland has been around using a few different names since the 1990s, and they focus primarily on policy advocacy with the state legislature and with local governments, school boards, etc. The Free State Legal Project grew out of a clinic put together by some students at the University of Maryland who were focused on providing legal services to low-income LGBTQ plus Marylanders. So the two organizations decided in 2016 that they should get together and in like classic Brady Bunch style, they formed a new family, which is Free State Justice. And we are engaged in a variety of work on behalf of Maryland's queer community. First off, we have direct legal services where we represent LGBTQIA plus Marylanders on a variety of legal issues related to sexual orientation or gender identity. Our work there is primarily focused on low-income Marylanders, but we do also do some impact litigation for the broader community where it makes sense to get involved in particular things. But most of our work is focused on people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford an attorney, especially an attorney who knows how to deal with them as a queer person. The second part of our work is our advocacy work, which is largely focused in working with the state government, municipalities, cities, school boards, et cetera, to push for policies that really help advance the LGBTQ community. I can talk a little bit later about some of the things we've done in that regard. And then the last pillar of our work that is really crucial to everything else is outreach and education. My colleague, Ezra Halstead, who's our Director of Education and Outreach, does quite a number of trainings with government agencies, organizations, corporations, communities, etc., on working with the queer community issues related to us, etc. They do quite a lot of great work in that regard. And then I'm also brought in sometimes to do some of those trainings. So,
of course. So as a legal director, are you involved with just kind of overseeing everything, or do you also like go into the courtroom to personally represent clients and stuff like that?
Yeah, so as legal director of Free State Justice, I sort of manage our litigation team. We have 3 attorneys on staff, but then we also have a whole group of pro bono attorneys that take cases through us. So there's about 250 250 attorneys on our pro bono panel.
Oh, wow.
And not all of them have cases at the same time, but they're on our list and they get our emails and, they'll take cases now and again. So most of the cases that come to us, we panel out to the pro bono panel. So we'll handle the things at the beginning of the case where the client comes to us and they explain what their issue is, and we'll do an intake for them, and then we'll then try to find a pro bono attorney who is specialized in that area of law, or who we can train in the legal issue. And then usually it'll be the pro bono attorney who is physically, like, for a lot of things they don't have to go to court, but if they do have to go to court, it'll usually be that pro bono attorney. We do have, as I said, 3 attorneys on staff, including myself. And so we each have our own small caseloads, and we'll occasionally go to court for those cases. But again, not everything requires us to go to court. The largest group of cases that we get are transgender Marylanders wanting to change their names and update their identity documents. And you currently have to go to court to change your name in Maryland. Or you currently have to file with the court, but you don't have to physically go to court.
Okay.
So yes.
It's a whole world that I'm so unfamiliar with that I'm sure most people are very unfamiliar with.
Yeah, so there's a process where you have to, technically there's this other way where you can just say that, like, my name is now whatever. My name is now Becky, and then everyone starts calling me Becky, and like technically that's legal, but the problem is that no like agency is going to issue you new ID that says that your name is now Becky. They want that court order. And so to get your license updated, your birth certificate, your passport, like your social security card, any of these things that are like crucial to living in the 21st century, to get those updated with your new name, you have to get a court order. But the process is pretty simple. It's straightforward for most people. There's some complications that come up, and there's some things that we want to do to try to simplify the process even more. But it's something where having an attorney to help you through the process can help, like, make things a lot easier. But they're great cases to give to pro bono attorneys because they're like, it's a short amount of time that you spend on something. You don't physically have to like go to court and argue before a judge. Our pro bono panel loves these cases. And they're great for the community as well, because like so many transgender Marylanders otherwise, like, the process can be kind of confusing. And so like having someone to help you through it is really helpful.
Right. No, it sounds like it. I'm assuming that even though you said these kind of cases don't have to be argued before a judge, it still involves, and I'm trying desperately to hold on to your every word because this is such a foreign concept for me. So pardon me if I misspeak. But since these just require, I think you said, a court order, I imagine there are still like court costs other than just the attorney costs, because you said that attorneys are pro bono. So how do the court costs get handled for people who are low income?
Yeah, so there was a little bit of an echo there for a second. So there's written into Maryland law, there's a way to have court costs waived if you're low income. And for our organization, it's actually incredibly easy because if you submit this form to the court that says that your client is eligible for services through a legal services organization such as FreeState Justice, then they're automatically eligible for a fee waiver.
Oh.
If you're not being represented by counsel, or you're not being represented by a legal services organization, there's like a form that you can file with the court that says, I'm low income. Technically it's an affidavit of indigency, but like, I don't really like saying like that you're indigent. Like, it's kind of, it sounds a little bit more like
harsh and like
Yeah, yeah,
clinical even.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you basically file a statement with the court that says like, I don't have, a lot of income, like here's how much I make, this is what I have to pay in rent, etc. It's, a pretty short form, but so there is a way for lower income folk to get the costs waived, even if they're doing it on their own. I
Hmm.
would say that if you're having to go to court for something like this and you're not represented by counsel, to talk to the people at the court clerk's office and say, hey, is there a way that I can get this waived? I know that there's some process there. And usually they'll be really helpful in,
Hmm.
getting you the right form and helping you fill it out.
But oh my goodness, like if if you need it, I would definitely get the help, because even so much legalese, I guess, is so kind of like not intuitive for, non-attorneys. So even the affidavit of
Indigent.
indigency, I told you I would struggle. It's just very, I would not assume that that would be what I would have to fill out. So
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are counterintuitive.
yeah.
And then also one of the huge gaps in our system is, well, first off, for low income folk, knowing what's available to you
Hmm.
is a huge problem because like information might be online somewhere, but if you don't know where to look for it, it can be,
Yeah.
impossible. So there's a huge information gap. The second problem is like eligibility for free legal services is tied to income, but um, basically there's this like complex formula that the Maryland Legal Services Corporation puts out every year that's based on like household income, and it's like if your household makes less than 50% of the median income in Maryland, then
Hmm.
you're eligible for free legal services, and there's a
Okay.
but if you're at 51%, you're not eligible.
Hmm.
And it's that group that's not eligible for free legal services but aren't really able to pay for things themselves,
Yeah.
because like getting through this world like is so hard for so many of us. And so it's really in that area that like I've been trying to I'm in the process right now of like revising a lot of our information that we have on our website for the broader community, not just the people who we take on as our clients, but also other people who just want to know what like these processes are like, so that if they're not eligible for our services, if they don't have the money to pay someone else, that they can figure out how the process works, and hopefully, at least for something like a name change that's pretty straightforward, handle it themselves. They might have to pay the filing fee with the court, which is, depending on your county and whether you're represented by counsel, will be between $165 and $185. But you can at least avoid some of the costs of hiring an attorney.
Right. Yeah, I think some kind of guide or something for the in-between people. Those are usually the people who get, even in terms of like healthcare and stuff,
Mhm.
the people who are just outside of eligibility for like Medicaid and stuff like that, but still really cannot afford it. They get the worst end of it. And I didn't realize that the laws change by county. So that's another to
Well,
add
and not even necessarily just like the laws, but just like the ways that they're implemented by
Oh
different
my God.
judges
Yeah.
in different courts. And so, like one thing that we do a lot on the name change front is technically Maryland law requires that if you want to change your name, you have to have notice of the name change published in a newspaper.
Oh,
Um,
really?
and in the past, that meant that it was printed in the notice section at the back of the paper, and no one ever looked at it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. Uh, but now, when so much of this stuff is online and
Mm-hmm.
it's online forever, like these legal notices have a lot different impact than they did in like 1983.
Yeah.
And
I feel like
so,
that might be dangerous if you're, say, if you're trying to escape an abuser or something, you change your name.
yeah, or, we have, again, trans clients who come to
Mhm.
us and they, well, I've had people call me up after they've changed their names themselves who are like, is there some way that I can get this newspaper to take this notice down?
Mhm.
Because it's the first thing that shows up for me on Google.
Oh my goodness. Where
Yeah.
did you
So,
say that that was applicable? I want to make a note of that.
so across the state of Maryland, there's
Oh.
there's a rule that in most, like the default rule is that in name change cases you have to have notice published. Now there's a way to ask the court to waive publication. And
Mhm.
so for our trans clients, um, we ask for publication waivers in basically every case. But there's some counties where publication waivers are granted for almost every trans client we have, and there's some counties where they are almost never granted. And so, the court is insisting on publication. And it's just, there's not really a legal reason for it. It's
Mhm.
just that it's like the judges in those county courthouses have just sort of developed different practices. And
Hmm.
it's the sort of thing where ideally we would get a denial of our motion to waive publication from a judge, and then we would say, okay, well, we're going to appeal this.
Mhm.
And then we would get an appellate decision that says, oh no, judges, you need to grant these waivers. Um, the problem is that our clients usually don't want to wait for the appeals process, because if you're talking about adding in an appeal to the Court of Special Appeals, possibly up to the Maryland Court of Appeals, which is our highest court, you're talking about adding months or possibly years to the whole process.
Right.
And most people just want to get it done. Like they're it's deeply, deeply frustrating
Mhm.
and dangerous to have ID that doesn't reflect who you are, because like every interaction you have with people in the world where you have to show them that ID, you're just worried about what's going to happen with it.
Mhm.
Like how they're going to treat you, how the people around you who happen to overhear things are going to react. Like there's just, it's just so stress inducing and like
Yeah.
worrisome, and it creates just this feeling of like not being safe,
Yeah.
especially for like individuals who are part of other groups that are subject to harassment by the police or the state, or other individuals. So if we're talking about like Black trans women, for instance, like getting an ID that like reflects their name and has like a correct gender marker on it, it's like that's a priority one thing, so
That's a
that,
big deal.
yeah.
Yeah.
um so people don't usually want to wait to go through the appeals process. So at some point I might have someone who's like, no, I really want to appeal this, and then I'll
Mhm.
be able to challenge like some of these judges who are ruling this way. But at the moment I haven't had anyone who wants to do it.
Right.
Now the flip side of that, or
Mhm.
not the flip side, but the kind of the other way that we are trying to get this changed is
Mhm.
with the legislature. We had a bill up in the legislature in the early part of this year, the 2020 legislative session, that would have required judges to grant publication waivers if the petitioner requested it in a name change
Mhm.
case. And that passed the Maryland House. It was either unanimously or there was like one or two votes against. It was an overwhelming majority either way. Sorry, we had a number of bills that we worked on, and I'm blanking on which ones were unanimous and which ones were not quite unanimous.
That's fair,
But
I'm sure.
it passed the Maryland House with an overwhelming majority, and a committee hearing was scheduled in the Senate the week that they shut down because of the pandemic. So we had hoped that this bill would have gotten through, that the publication requirement would have been at least made waivable, easily waivable for members of our community. But because of the pandemic, that didn't pan out.
Is there, since we've started kind of opening things back up, is that back to being worked on?
Yeah, so we definitely expect either the same exact bill or something substantially similar to be brought during the 2021 legislative session, which will begin in January. I think that one tweak that we're probably going to push for on it is ordinarily legislation goes into effect on October 1st after it's passed. So it will be the legislative session. The legislature meets from January to March, or to the very beginning of April, and then the governor has a period of time to veto or not veto legislation, and then and then any new laws go into effect usually on October 1st. There is a provision to have laws go into effect immediately after after the governor's period to veto them has ended. So for this, since like it's something that we were so close to getting passed before, that it's affecting the lives of so many people, I think we're going to try to see if we can get the legislature to make this one of those laws, so that, you know, hopefully by June of 2021, this won't be required anymore. But it depends on so much, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that the legislature needs to talk about when we meet back in session, because
Yeah.
they, as I said, they shut down in March of 2020, right at the very beginning of the pandemic. And there was some talk about having a special session later this year, and they've decided not to do that. So all of the COVID-related things that have been sort of percolating over the last year, that's all going to come up in January. And then all of the stuff that didn't get finished last year because they had to shut down early, that's going to come back. And then any new, like, important things that are, neither of those categories are going to come back as well. And we're not quite sure what the legislative session is going to look like. We don't know if people are going to be able to, go in person and testify, or if there'll be remote testimony, or, they haven't announced how it's going to work yet, at least not that I've seen. And also note that this is being pre-recorded, so.
Yes.
But so there's a lot of open questions as to what exactly the session is going to look like, and what that will mean for our ability to get, some of these things that are really crucial to the community passed.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're working on it, and there are a lot of moving pieces. I know I read that Maryland is actually considered to be fairly progressive in terms of civil rights and LGBTQ plus rights.
Maryland is definitely in the forefront in the United States on pushing LGBTQIA rights. We've had a number of laws over the years that have really expanded access to justice and non-discrimination principles, et cetera, for the LGBTQIA community. But there's still a lot to be done. And I'm going to give you a quick example from this past year of something that we were able to get done. And then I'll tell you some other stuff that, still is to be done. So I realized a while back that Maryland had no comprehensive non-discrimination law for healthcare or health insurance. And this was not just for like LGBTQ folk. It was for everyone. There was a Maryland state law from decades ago that prohibited racial discrimination in hospitals and nursing homes, but there was not a law that prohibited like other medical professionals, like if you go to your doctor's office, they were allowed to discriminate against people. Yeah.
Wow,
So
I would not even, I'm like furiously taking, I would not, it doesn't even, when you say it, it doesn't even sound right. It's like, how is that possible?
yeah, so it, I was like, wow, this seems like a big gap in our law.
Yeah.
Now, for a variety of reasons, it hadn't really been that much of a worry because we had federal legislation under the Affordable Care Act that prohibited discrimination in access to healthcare and in access to health insurance. Um, the problem was the current federal administration released a little over a year ago draft regulations that were changing some of the rules under the ACA, so that they wrote out the protections for transgender individuals. Um, and then they also restricted the application of the rest of the rules to just the programs that were funded by federal money rather than anyone receiving federal dollars. So there's so a lot of federal anti-discrimination laws are framed around like if you are receiving federal money for some reason, and it's something like, you know, if you, in the healthcare context, it's like if you receive healthcare reimbursement, health insurance reimbursements through a plan that is on a like ACA exchange,
Mhm.
then you're covered by these non-discrimination rules.
And one second, ACA is
It's the
Affordable
Affordable Care
Care
Act.
Act. Okay.
Yeah, Obamacare.
Mhm.
So now, if you interpret that broadly, then it's like almost everyone, because like if you accept health insurance, then you're going to be accepting um, marketplace plans, at least in some way. Almost all healthcare providers were covered by that, but because of the way that the Trump administration was reinterpreting these rules, it would make it much, much more limited. And so it would basically have meant that like you could only not discriminate against the people with the ACA plans, but you could discriminate against other people.
Okay.
It was not great. So I
No.
saw these draft regulations, last summer, and I was like, this is pretty terrifying.
Mhm.
And so I talked to our then executive director, Mark Procopio, and I was like, Mark, we should try to talk to some legislators and see if we can get like the ACA regulations as they stand now written into Maryland law, because this is a huge gap that potentially affects, people far beyond the queer community. And so we talked to some of our friends in the legislature, and they ended up, they rolled the health insurance non-discrimination rules into a broader bill that was designed to um, codify the Obamacare rules into Maryland law, regardless of what happens at the federal level. Because I'm sure, as you and a lot of our listeners are aware, there's been a lot of work over the past 4 years on the part of the administration and Republicans in Congress to either repeal or undercut the Affordable Care Act.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of worry in Maryland about what would happen if something happened to the Affordable Care Act to Maryland's health insurance exchange. So when they were passing this law earlier this year, we helped convince them to put in a express provision about insurance non-discrimination into that. They then also passed a separate law that prohibited discrimination in the provision of healthcare
Mhm.
in Maryland, and that applies to a long list of protected classes. So you cannot discriminate in the provision of healthcare on the basis of race, national identity, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, I believe disability. I think there's one or two more I'm forgetting. So it's a really nice, comprehensive bill that I'm really proud of having been involved with, because otherwise there would have potentially been this huge gap. Now, the Trump administration, they released their final regulations in early June. So they submitted the draft regulations a year ago, and there was this public comment period where people and organizations could like comment and say, you know, we like these, or you should tweak this, or this is horrible, or whatever. And overwhelmingly, the comments were like, this is not a good idea, don't do this. But unsurprisingly, the final regulations that they put out, there were like, you know, 90 pages of comments on the public comments that were like, we hear you, but we're not doing this. We're going to do this anyway.
Yeah.
So that came out on a Friday, and then on the following Monday, the Supreme Court ruled in the Bostock decision, which basically held that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 applied to discrimination in employment against people on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And so that immediately undercut the Trump administration's justification for these regulations. And so we've since seen litigation contesting the regulations, and there's a good chance they're never going to go into effect, but I still like sleep easier knowing that we still got things on the books in Maryland. That was a long drawn out example.
No, yeah, that's fine.
I'm now going to give you some examples of things that are yet to be done.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, there's things that are like missing on the books, where, you know, there's still like textual inequality. And a good example of that is you can still in Maryland kill a queer person and then go into court and claim that you should not be charged with murder because you panicked upon discovering that they were queer.
Really? That's wow.
Now it's not a like special, like, you know, oh, they refer to this as like it's either the gay panic or the trans panic defense, but there's not like a special thing in the law that says, you know, gay panic defense, you can do this. It's more like it's an example of a type of defense that could be raised that we have not affirmatively prohibited. Now, we have in, I believe it was the late 90s, we prohibited a similar defense in murder cases, which is where typically it would be a husband discovers that his spouse has been cheating on him and murders either the spouse or the person that she's cheating with. And in the 90s, we decided, no, that's not a good thing to allow people to do. So we had legislation that prohibited that. And you can no longer say that your charge should be mitigated from murder to manslaughter because you were, you know, enraged upon discovering that your wife was in bed with someone else.
Wow.
And so we and people in a lot of other states and organizations in a lot of other states have been pushing to ban the same sort of defense when it comes to LGBTQ individuals. And there have literally been situations where people have, you know, killed people because they're like, oh, I was worried you were coming on to me, or you know, they just felt threatened by the presence of someone. Or what we see a lot with trans folk is that people, I mean, it's usually men, just gonna be honest.
Let's be honest here.
They are attracted to a trans woman because she is attractive, she is a woman, and then they realize she is trans, and then they're like, they have this internalized like homophobia that then makes them angry at her for their finding her attractive, that results in them acting violently.
Do they actually say that they say that as the reason for their ensuing violence against the trans woman. They say that they think that's a legitimate defense.
It's a defense that's been used.
Oh.
It's not been used a lot in Maryland.
Mhm.
And where it has been used in Maryland, it's frequently been what I'd say a sham defense,
Mhm.
where the cases that I've looked at, it's people who like, okay, there was a case in Montgomery County in the late 90s or early 2000s where someone broke into a Catholic church while on drugs. I forget what drugs, but that's not really important to the story. They broke into a Catholic church and were like stealing from the box, and the priest like came in and was like, "Hey, what you doing?" And they killed the priest.
Oh, wow.
The defendant was promptly caught, and he told this story, which he didn't tell immediately. Like, he initially told the police something else, but at trial, he instead told this story that the priest had come down and had started coming on to him, and that it was only after the priest came on to him that he had to kill him.
Oh.
And uh, his this was apparently powerful enough for the jury at the time to reduce his um, to reduce the verdict from I think it was first degree murder to second degree murder. They still found him guilty, but
Right.
they did not find him guilty of first degree murder. And but there's literally no evidence that this story actually happened the way he described it. And
Yeah.
there's a number of other situations that, like, it's been something similar where someone has engaged in consensual sex acts with someone,
Mhm.
and then after the fact, either they've felt guilty about it, or their buddies like
Mhm.
make fun of them or something, and
Mhm.
then they decide to take out their sense of shame or whatever
Yeah.
against their partner.
Yeah.
So we're working to eliminate the panic defense in Maryland.
Mhm.
This is another bill that we had passed the Maryland House in 2020, but didn't get through the Senate in time. So that's an example of sort of something where we need affirmative legal action. There's also a lot of situations where the laws on the books seem good,
Mhm.
but the ways that they're actually implemented um, is not does not like lead to a sense of equality or equity.
Mhm.
Um, and so employment law is sort of a good example here, where technically in Maryland and now across the United States, you cannot discriminate against people on the basis of sexual orientation or their gender identity in employment. Um, but the thing is that employers tend to be pretty smart, and they know how to create a paper trail so that they have the pretense of not discriminating against you, but firing you for some other reason.
Mhm.
So we're now in a situation where it's rare for something like what happened in the Amy Stevens case, which is one of the three cases that the Supreme Court reviewed in this prior term, where she was a trans woman who came out to her employers, and then they immediately fired her on that basis. What we instead see a lot is someone who has a history of good work reviews. They're well liked, and then either they come out, or their coworkers realize they're queer, and then things change, and suddenly those glowing work evaluations that they'd had in the past, suddenly they start showing things like oh, here we're seeing some issues here, or your your clients are, saying they, don't like working with you as much as they did in the past, or, a variety of things. And it will be the same person doing the same job in the same way, but suddenly it's viewed through this different lens that makes it, very discriminatory in practice. But it can be very, very hard to prove those cases.
I was just going to ask, in that kind of discrimination, it's like, so we're mostly speaking on the LGBTQ plus community, but a lot of instances of discrimination exhibit themselves in similar ways, whether it's racial discrimination, gender, other types of gender discrimination, whatever, discrimination, religious, because it's very hard to prove, but the person who's being discriminated against knows they're being discriminated against. So I was going to ask, what would you, like, say in this instance, this scenario you just gave, where everything was fine before the person came out, but once they came out, they notice and they're sure of what's happening, but it's like, what would you advise them to do?
Well, so I would be talking to an employment lawyer.
Right,
who
that's
knows,
fair.
who knows what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But keeping a record of things is also
Mm-hmm.
crucial, and making sure that, if something happens, that you write it down. And if people start treating you differently, that you record that you save, like the emails where people, you know, the emails that are filled with microaggressions and things,
Mm-hmm.
that, if you're worried that you're going to be fired, that you start either, forwarding some of this stuff to a personal email account that you're going to have access to afterwards, or, something. Now, granted, you might have work policies that prohibit that, and, don't like violate non-disclosure rules, etc. I'm not advising any of that, but, you know,
Yeah.
also watch out for yourself, and you can always just write things down in a diary or something, so
Mm-hmm.
that there's a record of it later. But one of the biggest problems that we see with employment discrimination, in particular, is that it's the employers who hold all the records,
Right.
and so
Yeah.
it can be very hard to prove that discrimination has happened.
I think that the advice you just gave, of course, the main point is to speak to an employment attorney. That's the main takeaway. But I mean, before that, what you just said, I think a lot of people who are experiencing this would not even know to do that. So
Mhm.
that's really helpful because, again, the legal world is just this like whole new thing. So um, keeping a record, because when you're going to work every day and everything's been fine and you don't realize there's a shift that's happened, you might just be going about your day and you might not, as these things are happening, they're stressful, they're depressing, they're anxiety inducing, so you may not think that you should start recording things, but that would help. So
Mhm.
I think that even right there, that's very helpful for people. And I've even had friends that have experienced workplace discrimination, and they had to quickly realize what they had to do to secure themselves. So it sounds like, it's a lot to digest.
So there's a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot that needs, sorry, echo. Okay, echo's gone. There's a lot that needs to be done, to improve sort of these systems that exist. And we also see this very much in the criminal realm. We usually, like, as lawyers, refer to like the criminal justice system, but I don't really like using the word justice in relation to it, because it doesn't really seem just for
No,
most people.
no.
Um, and the even like there's so much, just like base level harassment of, especially like trans people, and especially trans people of color, by the police. And it's so easy to build up like a long rap sheet of all of these basically bogus charges that are like, nuisance crimes of like vagrancy, or, whatever, like where the police have just decided that because you are a like trans woman out in public, that you must be a sex worker.
Wow.
Um, and so like people build up these this history of arrests that don't necessarily go anywhere, but they show up in criminal record searches that are done when people are applying for jobs or applying for housing, and ensure like doing what we can to try to stop the police from like doing all of these bogus arrests in the first place, um, and then also expunging the records of them after the fact, so that people don't have all of this on their sheet, so that when they're applying for housing, they aren't rejected because their potential landlord thinks that they're a sex worker, um, or whatever. And all of this, it ends up in this vicious circle where you just need like the one thing on your record that sets off everything else, and then it's incredibly easy to like have to like lose your job, lose your housing, and then be unable to get something else, and then end up homeless. And like there's a lot of trans people who have very awesome jobs like mine, um, but there are also a lot of trans people who find themselves like in survival sex work because like they need to do something to pay the bills. And I want to create a system where people have the choice to not do that. Um, like I'm personally like, if you want to be involved in sex work, that's fine. But like, I want you to have a choice and not have it be like, just something that you have to do for survival. I want like trans people and queer people in general to like have the same employment and housing opportunities as everyone else. And again, this is very much an issue that where we have to keep intersectionality in mind, because it really does hit like Black trans women especially. And I mean, and also like I would be remiss not to note like the issues faced by Black trans men who are treated as Black men by the police. And um yeah, so
Yeah,
sorry.
I was gonna, no, there's a lot. It's so important, I think, to go down the kind of domino effect
Mhm.
like you just did, because I think people see, not I think, I know people see the end result of things and they're not aware. And usually that end result ends up just strengthening stereotypes. They don't see how we got to that point. So what
Mhm.
you just described, it's it just sounds basically kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The police or whomever see, say, like a Black trans woman and assume that they're sex workers, not just survival sex workers. So they hit them with all these charges. They have this idea that they're criminals of some sort. So they make their records reflect that. And then
Mhm.
as they're denied employment because of this record and denied housing, then they have to engage in illegal sex work at times to survive because no one else will hire them. And the issue with homelessness, one of many issues, is that a lot of times I think to get a job, if you're homeless, it's hard because you need to put down an address or you need to put down some kind of, what if you don't have your social security card or other forms of ID? You have to go get that. And then to get that, you need an address. And so it just becomes this kind of never ending perpetual state you're in of homelessness or joblessness or both. So there, yeah, it's a mess in
Yeah.
conclusion. But I think it's important for people it's easy for people to write others off. Of course, we know this, who's in their mind, their concerns don't concern them. So it's important to keep these things in mind, intersectionality, and just basically how we got how we get to places, not the journey to the place rather than the destination, I guess you could say.
Another thing that we see is that with a lot of, especially trans people, I mean, a lot of the things I'm talking about today affect individuals across the LGBTQIA spectrum, but they impact trans people the most because they're the folks who are subject to the most discrimination. There's a lot of people who are like, okay, we sort of understand gays and lesbians, but trans people, that's weird.
Yeah.
But, yeah, with trans people especially, and it's not universal. Some people, have great experiences, but there's a lot of people whose families are very unsupportive. And so, in for a lot of other folks, it's like if you lose your job and your house, you can maybe, go move back in with your parents or with your sibling or with grandma, or, there's usually some family member that's like, you can hang out here for a while, I don't want you here forever, but like, you can be here for a while. But like, if your family completely disapproves of you and, even if they technically are like, you can come home, but like they then spend the entire time disparaging you and who you are, like, it really makes things a lot harder for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Again, I don't want to create an idea that like the lives of all trans people are horrible and that, we all have families who hate us and that, we're all engaged in survival sex work.
Yeah.
But, some of us have very loving families and, we're very, we're in jobs that we love and, all of that.
No, that makes sense. I know you said Free State Justice deals a lot with the name changing for trans people and getting their documents changed over to the new name and stuff like that. What we're talking about now, is that another area that Free State Justice works with in terms of like the types of legal issues it helps the clientele with?
Yeah, so we only work in, well, for the most part, we only work in civil legal matters rather than criminal legal matters. The exception to that is, or the exceptions to that are, we do assist individuals with expunging criminal records. So if you have, arrests or, prior things that ended with like a probation before judgment, and then, there was, you went through probation and you never had to, serve a sentence, we'll help get those off your record. We also do assist some incarcerated individuals with like some conditions of confinement stuff. There's a the Maryland prison system is, I mean, the prison system just across the board is not great for trans people. And, we're pushing to improve the system in Maryland, but there's a lot of, people who are in a facility basically because the state has decided that they belong in the facility for their sex assigned at birth rather than their gender identity. And, they may not be given access to certain things that they need. And they might not be given access to like appropriate medical care and all sorts of things. So we do get involved with conditions of confinement work for incarcerated individuals to some degree. But by and large, and then also on the policy front, we advocate with the state legislature to change policies. And we do advocate some with like the Baltimore Police Department and other police departments to change their policies. But by and large, we're not going to be like representing people in like criminal cases.
Right. No, that makes sense. I was thinking more, does Free State Justice get involved with like housing discrimination? I don't know if that falls under civil because I don't know.
Oh yeah, so that would be a civil matter that we would potentially get involved in. With housing, housing is an interesting area because it's something that we definitely do occasionally, but most most housing cases that we see are not actually housing discrimination. They're instead like non-payment of rent. And frequently that's all tied together.
Right.
Because, if you're in a group that is systemically discriminated against, you're going to likely have issues paying rent. But most housing matters are framed through like non-payment of rent rather than through discrimination. That said, where there is something that's tied to someone's sexual orientation or gender identity more directly,
Mhm.
we do get involved. I had a client, for instance, in Baltimore City who had changed her name, and the Baltimore City Housing Authority was like, there was a complicated backstory as to why they didn't think she had changed her name, and I just had to
Mhm.
argue with them endlessly, and eventually they're like, oh yeah, you're right. And I was like, yeah, I know I am. uh, and we eventually got her
Exactly.
name changed so that like her housing voucher had her name on it.
Right.
um, and so she didn't have to like out herself to potential landlords and stuff. But a lot of sort of straight, I mean, maybe straight is the right word there. A lot of your more typical housing matters
Mhm.
will end up referring clients to the other legal services organizations that do a lot more of those, because
Mhm.
they're so specialized in them that they are often able to do them better than we would.
Mhm. No, that makes sense.
That's one
And
of the downsides of being
mhm.
an organization where we represent a type of client rather than a specific area of the law,
I see.
because people come to us with all sorts of issues related
Mhm.
to their sexual orientation or gender identity. And so we get a like wide swath of types of cases. But as I said, we only have 3 people on staff, so
Right.
there's only so many things we can be specialized in.
Right. No, that makes sense. And at least I feel like even again, because the legal world is so foreign to so many non-attorneys and such, that even the advice you're able to give, how you direct them, I'm sure is like very helpful. And that example you just gave of the person needing like for the housing voucher needing their identification and everything, that's like another example from what we were speaking of earlier of just this domino effect of kind of discriminatory policy or non-affirming identification, and how that can result in homelessness because that person wasn't able to get their voucher and everything settled. They might not have, I don't know what the full situation, of course, but they might not have been able to get the housing. So it's just a lot of things that I think people don't consider until they're in that kind of in that situation and having to deal with it. So luckily we have organizations like Free State Justice and people like CP to help us. Um, I want to thank you so much for your time today and helping us to kind of understand just kind of decode what all of this means. Sounds like there's been a lot of progress made, but of course there's still a lot of, a ways to go. But
Mhm.
um, I would say, how do you feel, just in, I guess, closing statements, how do you feel about the future with this type of legislation? Are you hopeful or kind of pessimistic? How do you feel?
Well, so you're asking me right now, in the weeks before the election. I think this is going to air after the election.
Yes, it is.
So
This,
I'm feeling a little bit more anxious than I probably would most other times, because
mhm,
there's definitely a lot on the line right now.
mhm,
And I'm optimistic, but I'm also very aware of how fast things could turn
Yeah.
very badly.
Mhm.
And we've had a good number of years where we've been slowly expanding rights for the LGBTQ community more broadly.
Mhm.
And the last few years we've seen a lot of expansion in rights for the trans community specifically. But there's a lot of very dangerous transphobic rhetoric that is going around, and there's a lot of the Republican Party sort of buying into transphobia more systemically that make me very worried about where things will be going in the future, especially if we see a Supreme Court that's even more conservative than it is right now.
Yeah.
So I try to remain hopeful, but I also am constantly aware of how things could go badly very fast.
No, that makes sense. And it's, you make a good point of the timing. A very good point. I have to keep in mind, we are going to air this in November, but it is October now. So it is
So
coming
my
down to
sympathies
that.
to you people in the future who are currently waiting for absentee ballots to be counted.
Yeah. And I even saw something, I forgot, I think it was a Carolina, so please don't quote me on that, but I think a lot of people had already voted through the absentee ballots, but now they're saying that those needed to have had a witness or something. So now they're invalid. So it's a whole.
So the South Carolina thing, if they had already been submitted without a witness, they're going to be counted.
Okay.
But ones submitted now need to have a witness.
Okay.
It's kind of a weird, like.
Yeah. There's so many with legality. There's so many like this, but if then type of things. So for non-legal minds such as mine, it's can be a lot to wade through. But once again, thank you. Sorry, what'd you say?
That you're better for it.
Right. Oh my gosh, I hope so. But thanks again for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time and being patient with my lack of knowledge and explaining everything so thoroughly. If you're interested in any legal advice and you belong to the LGBTQ plus community, please go to Free State Justice. Let me get the exact website. Yes, Free State. Oh, go
Free
ahead.
State. Sorry, it's freestate-justice.org.
Awesome. Yeah. So thanks for watching. Until next time.